And Georgia Durmush, who's here to present her COC. Wake up. Rhonda is being, as you know, has had an operation on her toe and cannot walk. So she is listening in via phone. And I'll let Georgia start. Thank you, Georgia.
Thank you, Janet. Before I present my confirmation of candidature presentation, as a proud Wellbeing woman of the Wellbeing Nation, I'd like to acknowledge the Camaragal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to the lands of the University of Sydney. I'd also like to extend my respects to other Indigenous brothers and sisters here today. Thank you, and thank you all for coming along and supporting me. And a very big thanks to my beautiful supervisors, Janet, Rob, and the lovely Rhonda, for all your support, and for my beautiful team, not ASSET anymore, but Indigenous Thriving Research Program. Thank you so much for all your support. I really appreciate it. Okay, so my thesis topic is Capitalising on a Positive Psychology of Indigenous Thriving, Identifying Indigenous Students' Conceptions of Wellbeing, and Enabling Voice and Agency. Okay, so before I introduce my thesis topic, I will talk and discuss a little bit about the current context of Indigenous Australian youth. So at the moment, we have Indigenous youth suicide epidemic. Recently, early this year, there's been recorded 78 deaths already happened this year. 20 of those deaths are being committed by individuals under the age of 18. Also, Indigenous youth representation in detention population. So, although Indigenous Australian youth represent 5% of Australia's youth population, they do represent 50% of Australia's youth detention population. Although another issue that was outlined by the latest Wellbeing report is that for Indigenous youth, another struggle is to secure employment. The finding found that 26% of Indigenous youth struggle to secure employment. However, this is not the narrative for all Indigenous youth. For those that do live in areas that have access to education and employment, we've seen now that the Year 12 completion rates are on track, as discussed in the recent Closing in the Gap report, from 59% in 2006 to 74% in 2016. Sorry, that was for the 2016 census. And university enrolments have also doubled over the past decade. These statistics do highlight the critical need for more research to focus on enhancing Indigenous wellbeing and Indigenous thriving. Okay, so my proposed thesis, the present investigation, aims to firstly highlight and identify strategies used by Indigenous youth or university students to enhance Indigenous educational success. Secondly, aim to increase understanding on how successful Indigenous university students are thriving and getting the most out of life by asking youth how they conceptualise wellbeing and what factors determine and enhance their wellbeing. Thirdly, and most importantly, my thesis aims to enable Indigenous youth voice and agency through focus groups and learning methodology, by giving university students across the country the opportunity to determine what influences their wellbeing, which will hopefully guide future education and health policy, and also to help enable increasement of Indigenous wellbeing and enhanced thriving. And importantly, being that study is thesis is qualitative by nature, when we do go out to the workshops and I'll explain in further detail, it's important that we learn and partner with Indigenous youth, and through their recommendations we also engage Indigenous youth as well as embed their voice in educational research. Okay, so one of the important questions that my thesis tries to answer is why is capitalising on Indigenous youth's voice and agency important? Well, firstly, Indigenous youth's voice is very important, and as an insider research member, I personally believe that it's important that youth are the ones that understand the current issues and how to solve that, and the recommendations, as they are the next generation of leaders and trailblazers. Importantly, it's Indigenous youth who understand what motivates and drives them to educational success, as well as the factors that enable them to have well-being. And also, lastly, the most important factor is that Indigenous youth represent a majority of the Indigenous population, as the 2016 census states that the median age for Indigenous Australian population is 23. Okay, so the literature review. So at the moment there's a massive gap in the literature, not just for Indigenous youth, but for youth as a whole, in understanding enhancing wellness and enhancing youth wellbeing. So the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare acknowledge that there is often a paucity of attention and resources devoted to young people. Frequently they're lost in systems that focus on either children or adults, yet investment in youth both socially and economically is powerful. This is really important as I've said, youth are the future leaders, and not only if we understand about enhancing their well-being and their thriving, that will also ultimately have a positive impact on society as a whole as the future leaders. So Professor, an anthropologist, Marcia Langton, states that there's this new narrative for Indigenous youth in particular, and she states that there is a new generation of Indigenous people who are turning dreams into reality. Education, economic participation, self-esteem and success are part of this new Indigenous world, and there is no going back. This is really important now that Indigenous people, in particular youth, now have access to education and employment if they're in the areas to do so, and now able to get educated, get employed, and able to have a positive impact, not just on Australian society, but themselves and the whole community. And it's important to acknowledge that there are a lot of successful stories and people out there, and Indigenous entrepreneurs, people travelling, professors, teachers, and that's what I hope that my thesis does, is to reflect these success stories and to acknowledge that there are Indigenous youth thriving, and how can we enhance that and what enables them to succeed. And also, Marcia Langton acknowledges that there is emerging middle class of Indigenous Australians, and that's what my thesis hopes to do, is to acknowledge that as well. However, much of the reporting in the literature about Indigenous Australians does stem from a deficit discourse that only focuses on how Indigenous Australians are disadvantaged or how they're below socio-economic indicators. And so much research does point to looking at how to enhance Indigenous thriving, enhance Indigenous wellbeing as well. So the strength-based approach is what my proposed thesis stems from. So a strength-based approach is defined as seeking to move away from the traditional problem-based paradigm and offer different language and set of solutions to overcoming an issue. So one of the important benefits of strength-based approach, what the literature is saying, is that if we stem from the strength-based, we're able to, one, acknowledge how Indigenous, in my case, youth are thriving. Strength-based is also important because it focuses on empowerment, healing, self-determination, which are really key factors for Indigenous Australians, and that's for everyone, not just Indigenous people. It also challenges the negative stereotypes that has often been generated by deficit discourse, and importantly, it gives Indigenous Australians and groups whose voices have been ignored and silenced the opportunity to voice their narrative and to counteract those produced false claims and decolonise. And that's what I hope to do, is by asking Indigenous youth their perspective, embedding that into research, and so they can reclaim the narrative and have their voice heard. Okay, just to recap some of the aims of my research. So importantly is to give voice and agency to Indigenous youth who are thriving. Secondly is to listen and embed Indigenous youth perspectives and worldviews into research. Thirdly is to act on recommendations Indigenous youth are proposing, partnering with them. And so because it's qualitative, it's not just going into community and just taking information. It's also partnering with them and actually connecting with the youth and asking them what are some issues that you'd like researchers to focus more on, or how do you conceptualise well-being, and so ultimately the goal is to transform and change education and positive psychology research to better reflect Indigenous reality and needs. And the more research that specifies Indigenous youth perspectives, we'll hopefully see more Indigenous youth thriving. Okay, so well-being is a key factor, and the literature state that well-being is the foundation to thriving. So well-being is the quality of an individual having an overall good life. Well-being is, literature says that it's sought to promote happiness, success, and good health. And the OECD defines well-being as the psychological, cognitive, social, and physical qualities that students need to live a happy and fulfilling life. It's not just having physical good state of health, but it's also having a good financial position, good social emotional well-being and health, and an important factor the literature is saying is cultural well-being for Indigenous youth, which what this definition is missing and lacks as a Western definition, and that's now leads us into our next slide, which what my proposed thesis aims to do is to understand how Indigenous youth conceptualise well-being and what well-being means to them. And so what the current literature is saying is that cultural identity is argued to be the most significant influence factor in enhancing resilience and well-being for Indigenous youth. Kerry 2013 acknowledges that self-determination control is a really important aspect, and I think it's not just for Indigenous people, but this comes from having a voice and agency as well, having Indigenous youth being able to determine what well-being means to them and taking ownership of that. And I think that leads to our next point, as argued by Lovett, that a major barrier to effective measurement of well-being for Indigenous people is not actually, research is not actually asking them, how do you conceptualise well-being, what does that mean to you? Whereas, some researchers in the past, we've seen they've gone to communities and they've kind of had these underlying assumptions, and then they've applied them to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And that's what my proposed thesis aims to do, is to give that ownership and Indigenous youth to have their voice and agency what they think about well-being as well. And concepts, Western concepts and definitions of well-being don't particularly match up well with Indigenous youth's well-being as well. So that's another key aspect I hope to find. Which leads us on to Pat Dudgeon's and the Australian Indigenous Psychological Association. They've come up with this model of social and emotional well-being from an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspective. So this model overall kind of says that land is central to well-being, connection to country, connecting to culture is really important for Indigenous people, connection to family and kinship, however, connection to spirit, spirituality, ancestors, and I think traditionally speaking, connection to country is really important. It's part of spiritual understanding of everyday life and purpose for Aboriginal people. But now that we're living in a contemporary society, and most of us do live in urban areas, connection to country might be seen in a different way. It might be seen as attending cultural events or just hanging out with mob or community. In this model, especially when we look at connection to spirit, spirituality, and ancestors, some Indigenous youth might not be able to relate to that as being an important aspect of their everyday well-being, and that's what I hope to ask in the workshops across different unis across the country. We're going to show this diagram to the students and ask them, does this diagram apply to you? What are some aspects that you think enable you to have your everyday life well-being? And it'll be interesting to see what they have to say. Another design of well-being, this is the multi-dimensional model of student well-being. Hasn't been published yet. You probably all know, some of you might not have seen this before. This was students in years 4 to 10 who scored the top band, 3 bands in that plan, were asked about their well-being and what factors were important. I just looked at this for Indigenous students that were asked, and cultural well-being again was an important aspect for them, in particular cultural cognitives, having knowledge and understanding of your culture, as well as cultural effectiveness was really important, so connecting to culture were kind of the key aspects of that for them and what well-being meant for them. Okay, so the research design. So Dr. Rob Rothman and myself plan to host half-day workshops at the following partner universities. So tomorrow, it's exciting, we've got our first data collection at the University of Sydney with 6 students. We've also got ACU in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Charles Darwin University, the Bachelor Institute, which is located an hour's drive from Darwin, and the University of Queensland. We hope to host our workshops or focus groups. Hopefully with 8 to 10 Indigenous university students. They need to be youth, so aged between 18 to 25. Doesn't matter what subject or course that they're studying, they just have to be Indigenous youth. And the importance and why we're going to all these universities, we're comparing different perspectives from Indigenous youth. We acknowledge that not all Indigenous youth are the same. Depending on where you live and where you come from, you hold different perspectives and experiences. You might have different issues or concerns to you, and wellbeing might look differently to you, like I said with the model. Hopefully we're getting varied perspectives from you as well, good representation. Okay, so methodological approaches. So my main methodology is decolonizing methodology, So Professor of Indigenous Education at Waikato University, New Zealand, Linda Smith, I've heard she's come and presented here before. Her methodology, decolonizing, I feel is very much connects to my proposed thesis. She argues that it's really important for Indigenous people's perspectives and worldviews to be embedded in research, as we know historically, Indigenous people have only had several generations of having access to education, and a lot of research about Indigenous people comes from a non-Indigenous standpoint position, and so so one of my goals is to decolonise education research and embed Indigenous youth perspectives in education research that affects them. Linda Smith defines decolonisation as a process that engages with imperialism and colonialism at multiple levels. For researchers, one of those levels is concerned with having a more critical understanding of the underlying assumptions, motivations and values which inform research practices. Yarning methodology. Yarning for Indigenous people just means having a general conversation with someone. Yarning is really important. Indigenous culture, traditionally it was how we used to transmit knowledge and narrative and stories and songlines. And an important aspect that Yarning methodology talks about is the importance of research, especially qualitative research, is to achieve good trust and a great respectful research relationship with the participants. And so social yarning just means before you ask your participant research questions or you start your interview process, it's important to develop a good connection and relationship with them and talk about something that might have to do with that research, and that's what social yarning, and that's really important in Aboriginal culture, is to connect with people and relationship building as well. And that's what I hope I do with my participant, or with the university students, is to develop a great research relationship. Also what I hope, and the essence of this thesis is very much stems from participant action research. So the main objective of PAR, or participant action research, is for researchers to implement positive change and impact their research population, and that's what I hope is to enable voice and agency, and to hopefully that this thesis has a positive impact, as hopefully Indigenous youth voices will be in research and will be defining what wellbeing means to them, and hopefully that will affect policy, which will then hopefully affect Indigenous youth, where we'll see more enhanced Indigenous thriving and wellbeing. Another element of it is through partnership and collaboration. So one of the questions in the workshop which we'll be asking is, what is something, what are some issues that affect Indigenous youth, and what would you like researchers to topics that they should be exploring, and that is partnering with them. And they're not just participants, but they're also important people that we can work with in the future as well. So it's engaging with individuals who hold same shared purpose, and that is hoping to see Indigenous youth thrive. So my timeline. Data collection starts tomorrow, so August to October this year, we're completing data collection. We've got Brisbane next week, University of Queensland, which is exciting. And then so October to December at the end of this year, we'll be completing transcriptions and analysis. And then early next year, 2020, I'll be completing my research questions and aims chapter. And then from April to June, I'll be expanding my literature review chapter. And then 1st of August, I'll hopefully submit 2 chapters for my mid-candidature review. And then from July to September, I'll hopefully complete my theoretical chapter, and then methodological approaches at the end of next year. 2021, my final year, I hopefully finalise complete working drafts, and then hopefully I'll submit to examiners on the 31st of July. So yeah. Thank you.
Any questions, please, for Georgia?
Are you gonna fly everywhere in those 3 months?
Yeah.
Do you need company?
Actually, we've got lovely Rachna's coming with me next week to Aspen to help with technology. Yes, so yeah.
Mr. Jones.
Georgia, I was just going to, it's just a comment really. I thought it was great, thank you. I was just going to suggest that it sounds like it's really important to define well-being, and you know, all of the expertise here is fantastic, but with voice, I'm wondering, because my background is linguistics, and there's a lot of good work in ethnographic linguistics around conceptualising voice, and how once you theorise and conceptualise voice, it can really help with analysis further down the track.
Definitely.
So I'm just wondering whether, you know, just a suggestion really that you engage a little bit with some of the work that's been done around voice.
I think, so you know the Gala Festival's on the weekends, it's a cultural festival that's held annually. And from this year's festival, facilitated by AIM, the youth, at the Youth Forum, there was a statement we sent around that was quite beautiful, and it's imagination, declaration, and we hope to show the youth, so the university students, that declaration, and ask them what would they like to imagine and see in the near future. So I thought, yeah, thanks for that email. But yeah, that's really important as well, and that talks a lot about voice and agency. Yeah.
Hi Georgia, I'm Elspeth Freud, part of your panel from the School of Allied Health. Fantastic presentation, thank you, and a really exciting project that you've got ahead of you. Just a question about one of your aims you said was to act on the recommendations. I'm not clear in your methodology what the next steps are, if that's part of your project.
Yeah, so I mean, the PhD does stem from a pilot known as Deadly Youth Leaders Trust, and the aim was to ask youth as well, you know, so one of the questions, is how do you think Indigenous youth voice can be leveraged or embedded in education research? And so one of that was asking, you know, do you think, and this was on the ACU, what's it called? The ACU, the ARC.
Centre of Excellence.
Yeah, Centre of Excellence thing, yeah. And the PhD's kind of coming away from that, but we're not going to ask them, you know, what do you think directly about the committee, because we're going to ask them, you know, do you think, what's your thoughts about having a committee that works with the researchers here as well? We're just going to let that question go, and hopefully that might be after the PhD as well. Yeah, having that committee.
So it sounds like acting on the recommendations actually isn't part of your project, is that?
Well, I mean, that'd be the future, and that, yeah.
It's an outcome of it, rather.
Yeah, I hope, yeah.
Thanks.
In relation to the participatory action research model, are you trying to improve the lives of the university Indigenous students, or are you trying to determine how they can serve as models to improve the outcomes for younger students, or both?
Yeah, probably both, yeah.
Which is the major focus?
In what, sorry?
Which is the major focus? Having them as role models?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, as, you know, university students and next leaders and influencers. Yeah, definitely.
Any more questions? If not,
Georgia. Yeah, just follow up on Herb's question. Participatory action research, I thought that is for change.
Yeah.
But you're collecting data once.
Yeah.
So how do you see change?
Well, I hope that my thesis has a positive change and shapes, education and positive psychology research through embedding Indigenous use voices, and yeah, that's why kind of maybe not action, maybe. Yeah. So I know what you're saying, like practical action.
There's I guess participatory is fine to me, but action doesn't sound.
Janet, I've got a question for Georgia.
Yep. Yes. Hi, Rhonda. Yes.
Georgia, what sort of thought have you given to your participants checking your findings and your interpretations of the data and communicating the results back to participants and communities?
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's something that I'm definitely doing. Yeah, so what Rhonda was saying is, what Rhonda was saying is, once I've completed all my findings and my data, will I be reporting that back to the participants for their approval and their interpretation of it as well? Yeah, so I'll be doing that. Yes.
Is that it, Rhonda?
That's all? That's all one question?
Yes.
Okay, is there any further questions? Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Georgia.